can you identify some of the key areas of interest or concerns in the Republican and Democrat camps?
Trump is unpredictable. This would matter whether the fact that he is by nature an isolationist. We've come to the point where I think there is an appreciation, a growing appreciation, that South Asia matters. If you're concerned about the Palestinian cause, how could you not be also concerned about the Kashmir cause?
East Asia policy of the US and the very destabilizing developments in the Middle East. Do you think this will sort of eclipse South Asian interest or relevance in the Beltway, or do you think it will make it more relevant in terms of more areas of convergences?
South Asia is a major player here. It's an area that has nuclear weapons. There is the perennial concern here about the potential for a cataclysmic fight between India and Pakistan, both nuclear-capable countries, and what that implication would be for the region and indeed for the globe.
In Pakistan, we see 4 types of terrorist organizations gradually taking hold again in Afghanistan. Transnational and global terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and Daesh. A few organizations operating in Balochistan, particularly Balochistan Liberation Army and Balochistan Liberation Front, which Pakistan has deep concerns from. And the third category belongs to those terrorist outfits which rely on a religious ideology like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. How does Washington look at these 3 sets of terrorist organizations?
This is where the United States is actively working with Pakistan in taking counterterrorism measures.
U.S. is, as a great power, returning to the great power rivalry and recovering from the war on terror. The actual attack on the U.S. Citizens and mainland took place through non-state actors. So don't you think the U.S. will be making a mistake, neglecting this grave and growing threat again? U.S. prefers hard power to contest and challenge the growing soft power of China.
I personally think that the United States has overreacted to the Chinese involvement, for say, with Pakistan, that there were areas where the U.S. and China could cooperate or where they have parallel interests which are not contradictory.
Viewers, very warm welcome to another episode of V News English program Perspectives. Today we are privileged to be joined today by one of the leading authorities on South Asia across Atlantic, Professor Weinbaum. Professor Marvin Weinbaum is director of Middle East Institute's Pakistan and Afghanistan Studies program. He has served in a very important and critical episode at the State Department from 1999 to 2003. And he's also a professor emeritus at the University of Illinois. I think it's a privilege that you're joining. Thank you so much, Professor Marvin Weinbaum, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Let me start off first by asking your perspective on the current political campaign afoot in both the Republican and Democrat camps. How do you look at their contrasting approaches and possible policy agenda towards South Asia in the coming years?
Well, let me start by saying that until recently, I would say that we were in a period where both parties pretty much had the same approach. And that approach was, by and large, to accept the relationship, which had been one of up and down for so long, And I saw it as maturing for a long time, in that we had fewer illusions about one another. We had more realistic expectations. The idea that somehow we were natural allies on just about everything, and where we differed was just a matter of not explaining ourselves well enough or building some trust. But I think that we came to a point, and I think we are there as well now, where we saw that there were real differences and that we had areas of convergence, but also areas of divergence, and that we would have to build our relationship around the former and learn how to deal with the latter.
Okay, before we come to the areas of convergences and divergences, can you identify some of the key areas of interest or concerns in the Republican and Democrat camps regarding the South Asian region?
Let me come to that. We've been so focused on South Asia mainly because of the Afghan conflict that now it's about time that we reset our priorities in terms of our foreign policy, and that whether it was for the Democrats at least, and Republicans, I should say, it was that really the concern, it was a feeling that really our national security priorities dictated that now that in both parties, that we now focus on the Far East. And yes, South Asia as it is related to the Middle East, yes, but that we really have to put all of our resources where the potential dangers are. But then what we have seen now more recently is an eruption, and it never really was quiet, an eruption of problems, serious problems in the Middle East. And here as well, I think that both parties appreciate the fact that we're going to have to shift our attention. Well, anyway, the point I'm making here is that South Asia has been deliberately put aside, not completely as some people would have, because after all, we're still talking about concerns about the export of terrorism. We're still concerned about the fact that we have worries about in the United States, worries about China and Russia and the relationship of countries in South Asia with those countries. These things were going to be there, but there was a deliberate effort here to somehow gain a relief from South Asia. That certainly describes both parties.
But that brings me to another very interesting question. How do you look at the East Asia policy of the US and the very destabilizing developments in the Middle East? Do you think this will sort of eclipse South Asian interest or relevance in the Beltway, or do you think it will make it more relevant in terms of more areas of convergences and deeper partnerships?
Well, I think we're coming to the point where we recognize that you can't really separate these, that so many of the concerns that we have in the great power struggle that's emerging here, you can't understand them completely if you leave out South Asia. South Asia is a major player here. It's an area that has nuclear weapons. It's an area that has a reputation for launching terrorist groups. There is the perennial concern here about the potential for a cataclysmic fight between India and Pakistan, both nuclear capable countries and what that implication would be for the region and indeed for the globe. So we've come to the point where I think there is an appreciation, a growing appreciation, that South Asia matters. However, having said it is priority. The focus now, particularly, is on the Middle East and particularly the Gulf region. And here, I don't see a great difference between the two parties, but we really don't know what would happen with a Trump presidency. I think it's fairly safe to say that if the Democrats hold on to the presidency, it doesn't require Joe Biden for this. If they hold on to it, there probably will be continuity here. But Trump is unpredictable. We know from when he was president that he said some rather nasty things about Pakistan. This would matter whether the fact that he is by nature an isolationist when it comes to American foreign policy, how this would play out. So it's a very uncertain time because we don't know what the outcome of the election. It's very close here.
So when you look at the current crisis in the Middle East, particularly regarding Iran, if you see deepening of crisis and escalation of threats between Israel and Iran, do you think how will the two camps see it, as an opportunity or as an annoyance?
Well, there's a general concern here, of course, about Iran and the potential now of an escalating conflict in the region. We can see what the Democratic administration's approach to this has been. Until the recent assassination in Tehran, there was a feeling with the new president that maybe in the State Department, this was certainly the case, that maybe there was now a pathway to dampening down the hostility between the two countries. But the assassination probably has put that on the shelf, if not removed it completely. So we have so many moving parts here now. We have so many variables that seem to be engaging. It's a very dynamic situation, is of course the way to describe it. So it's hard to say. And for that reason, there is great uncertainty. And that uncertainty in foreign policy, and that uncertainty, I think, now applies to South Asia as well.
So now let's focus on the bilateral aspect of Pak-US relations. What are the key trends that you have witnessed in Washington right now? Because in Islamabad and Pindi, there is a sense of gradual and incremental improvement of bilateral relations and a sharing of concern regarding the revival of terrorist influence and activities in Afghanistan. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that on Afghanistan, of course, there is concern, mutual concern, and there is cooperation. I'm certain there is considerable cooperation at the intelligence level. This has never really ended because of a convergent interest here. No, there's reason to expect this will continue as long as we also see a Pakistan government that is interested in keeping relations with the United States in a positive vein. What might have happened or what may happen if there is an Imran Khan government, the feeling here is that could be different. because here again, you have a player who is to some extent unpredictable in this area. So we watch that, but we have a test of it now with this assassination and the potential here for a regional war. And this is something I've just written on today. In fact, we're watching what Pakistan's position is going to be here. What we've seen thus far, as it's viewed, I think here, what we've seen this far is that Pakistan has been diplomatic in the way in which it's handled this. It has not done as Afghanistan has, although they won't deliver on it, offered to send troops. It has certainly made its statement very strongly in diplomatic terms about its need for condemnation here about the killing of Haniyeh. Certainly it has done that, but the expectation, I think, is that Pakistan will pay its dues to the community, but that it's not going to involve itself no more than it did in the Yemen conflict, when there were strong pressures from Saudi Arabia to become involved. At the same time, what I'm seeing, at least, is that there has built, because of a generations here of sympathy for the Palestinian cause, there is now a strengthening here of popular feeling being led by religious groups, religious parties, but others here for a more aggressive approach. You be a better judge of whether this is likely to go anywhere. Another interesting development here is what I'm hearing is that in Pakistan, there's been an effort here to link this crisis with the Kashmir issue. And that there are, correct me if I'm wrong, there are people who in Pakistan are saying that RAW indeed worked together with Mossad, the Israeli spy agency, and this was a joint operation in Iran. Now, it seems far-fetched, but nevertheless, I have heard, I think, responsible people in Pakistan make this case. So I ask you, are you hearing this as well? And I can see the sense here, because it says now to the Ummah, it says, if you're concerned about the Palestinian cause, how could you not be also concerned about the Kashmir cause? And that
I think there is a growing sense in Pakistan. There are a few very important similarities between Palestine and Kashmir. I can, as a political scientist, identify only 4. Both are Muslim majority states. Both are UN recognized international disputes. Both have occupied territories. Both have a lingering and bitter history of conflict. Both are occupied by nuclear powers. So I think there are a lot of similarities, which make a lot of people try to trace, their similarities and discuss it that way. But let me ask you a very important question regarding Afghanistan. In Pakistan, we see 4 types of terrorist organizations gradually taking hold again in Afghanistan. And the recent UN report also recognized that. In the first category are the transnational and global terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and Daesh. The second category are those organizations which use ethnic identity to promote their terrorist activities. And there are a few organizations operating in Balochistan, particularly Balochistan Liberation Army and Balochistan Liberation Front, which Pakistan has deep concerns from. And the third category belongs to those terrorist outfits which rely on a religious ideology, like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which seem to have a very close liaison with Afghan Taliban. I want your take on how does Washington look at these three sets of terrorist organizations in terms of its threat perception and possible areas of convergence and cooperation with Pakistan against them?
Well, it's most of the number that you mentioned. It's most, of course, concerned about those that have global aspirations, like Daesh and Al-Qaeda. And this is where the United States is actively working with Pakistan in taking counterterrorism measures. It doesn't mean that there's not interest here in these others as well, particularly because Iran is involved in the ethnic with the ethnic groups like the Baluch, and it's a situation, I think, basically where it's a question over how can we cooperate here. There's very little we can do aside from effectively encouraging Pakistan to take those, to share with us what intelligence they have, and were the United States, mounting drone attacks here to follow through on its concerns here, Pakistan could play a role. But Pakistan is very insensitive. It's very sensitive on this issue, as we know. So I think this is going to be a factor here. But the United States is more concerned at this very moment with the fact that Russia and China are playing an increasingly strong role in Kabul. And this is the United States' own fault. As I see it, it is virtually the only country that has no important country that has a strong stake in Afghanistan that doesn't have a single diplomat in the country. Its contacts are very limited, whereas even the European community has considerably greater contact with the Taliban. Now, it's not that we're about to get the Taliban to change their policies on anything, but without those kind of contacts, what we are doing is ceding to countries that we do have concern about, and giving them putting them in a position where they would develop a strategic relationship with Afghanistan. And personally, I don't think that there's enough attention being given to that. We're so concerned here, rightly so, with the social issues, particularly the women's issue, that we've allowed that to dictate the rest of our foreign policy toward Afghanistan. But we have, just as with Pakistan, we have areas of convergence or potential convergence with Afghanistan, areas which are to our mutual benefit with Afghanistan. And that's where we can build, the United States can build areas of cooperation.
But let me ask you a supplementary question here to better understand your insightful perspective on it. There is obviously a very serious discourse in the Ivy League universities around the world as well that U.S. is, as a great power, returning to the great power rivalry and recovering from the war on terror. And the recent crisis in Middle East would perhaps also, and the Ukraine conflict, is making Washington commit itself more aggressively towards the great power competition. But when you look at history, when you were at State Department, you would recall 9/11 happened. The actual attack on the US citizens and mainland took place through non-state actors. So don't you think the US will be making a mistake, neglecting this grave and growing threat again?
No, that exists independently of the great power rivalry here. I don't know. I think everyone has contributed to this. I don't think the United States has. Certainly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine set off alarm bells here in Europe. And so that's changed the complexion of things considerably. China's Belt and Road program is not aggressive in that way, but it is certainly its forward policy in this area has enormous economic considerations and potentially strategic as well. So I think it's both, but the immediacy of the non-state actor here is something, of course, which Pakistan has much more at stake than the United States does.
I think that brings me to my last question. At a conceptual level, Professor Weinbaum, you've studied the contrasting strategic thoughts and cultures of both, China and the US. But why, as a student of international relations, US prefers hard power to contest and challenge the growing soft power of China?
Well, it's unusual here because much of American foreign policy over the years has been based on soft power.
Exactly. So why it is neglecting its own soft power and relying heavily on hard power?
Well, I don't know that we've reached that point where we see this hard power in motion, but it grows out of the fact that China is viewed here as not just as a competitor, but as an adversary, and it partly is a reading of the fact that China has itself, of course, militarily come from nowhere to where it is here a significant challenger to American ascendancy in several areas of the military sphere. So it's very complex. There's no simple way to explain this, but all of these sort of work to get in tandem here. And I personally think that the United States has overreacted to the Chinese involvement, for say, with Pakistan, that there were areas where the U.S. and China could cooperate, or where they have parallel interests, which are not contradictory. Unfortunately, we haven't seen this. So there's it's the way it is. Sometimes it's just a matter of using some old ideas and replanting them, and without recognizing that the important nuances that exist in this process. So I think that we're sort of feeling our way here in many ways, and South Asia is I think a good testing ground for this. I don't think that it's going. If there's going to be any area of real collision, it will be in South Asia. It's more likely to be in the Far East, Taiwan. It's likely to be where the U.S. Involves itself with Iran. And of course, we already have an area of enormous friction as a result of what's going on in Ukraine. So it's a very unsettled time, Muhammad Ali. It's a very, very unsettled time that we live in now. I think we're all very much acutely aware of this, but we haven't found out the tools, I think, to be able to deal with it, the effective tools.
Indeed, and that reminds me of a very famous Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. And I think with each
a well-known curse here.
The times are becoming more interesting. So, Professor Weinbaum, I wish you good health, and I hope the incoming administration will benefit from your immense wisdom, experience of dealing with South Asia and managing and navigating U.S. policy according to the expectations of its partners like Pakistan and other players. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your very candid, insightful analysis. Viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Keep watching V News English Perspectives for such insightful and timely analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.